Hi, I'm Curt Doty with RealmIQ, an AI consultancy, and this is our podcast, RealmIQ Sessions, where we talk about everything AI with AI leaders and founders from around the world. Please give us a follow or subscribe. And today's guest is Neville Spiteri. Neville is the co-founder and CEO of WEVR, an award-winning interactive software studio. WEVR was named one of the top 10 most innovative companies in AR and VR in 2017 by Fast Company, and Neville was honored in Variety's list of the top 30 digital media executives to watch in 2017 as well. Neville is a computer scientist, a creative executive who's credited on critically acclaimed franchises in films, video games, and immersive media. And we actually share a past at digital domain as well as electronic arts. If you didn't know, I'd love to talk about that. But hopefully I got that right, Neville. Welcome, and please cover what I didn't mention, but I can't wait to talk to you about AI and special effects and your whole journey. So what, did I get it? Did I get it right, your intro?
Absolutely, Curt. And thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation. Yes, indeed, that was a great intro. Much appreciated. We, as a company, we've been around now for 12 years at WEVR. But my personal interest in this aspect of technology started a long time ago. Even before I came to the United States, when I first played my first, video games as an 11-year-old in the early 80s. On a ZX81 computer, and kind of saw for the first time, how software and code can result in, images moving on a screen and sounds being generated, and something clicked in my brain pretty early on that has kind of fascinated me and kind of propelled my journey forward ever since. But yes, we'd love to talk about digital domain and electronic arts. Those were sort of key points on the journey, which I am trying a lot.
I was at digital domain very briefly, trying to run a kind of interactive studio within the larger corporation. Didn't last long because the recession hit. But prior to that, I actually rebranded Electronic Arts. I was part of that team, led that team for the rebranding of Electronic Arts, Electronic Sports, Electronic EA Sports, if you remember that. And that's, of course, during brand for, I don't know, God, 20 years now. Anyway, so that was my experience. But I, worked with all the high level execs and certainly shepherding that brand into a new era. But yeah, so, I share a past also, just being a creative in a digital world and seeing all these technologies come through the years and affect, how you do creative or really get excited about, wow, I could do this now. And I've always been one to embrace new technologies and figure out how to use it and use it in my creativity, whether it's branding or marketing or interactive content. And so I imagine you share that same type of journey, because you've been in the center of all of that with media and entertainment and gaming. Tell me about that journey.
Yeah, happy to. And actually, I think an interesting place to start might be the reference you made that you were working on an interactive studio at Digital Domain, which is an interesting concept, right? So Digital Domain, for example, is a company that was principally set up by filmmakers. As you know, Jim Cameron was the principal there, and the idea was to use digital technology to tell linear stories. But of course, from an early stage, right around in the early 90s, there was also the beginnings of 3D video games and the use of software and technology to create interactive media and experiences. And by and large, for those first couple of decades there, the evolution of gaming and video game development, and film and linear narrative. We're sort of parallel tracks, but kind of separate, really separate missions, separate methodologies in terms of how all of the content is being produced and created. It as sort of time rolls forward and the introduction of game engines were started to being used in order to create higher visual fidelity cinematics. You fast forward today and, real-time 3D game engines are sort of at the center of all kinds of media production, whether it's completely linear for an animated movie or a feature film or TV series, all the way through fully interactive games. And
I hate to say
yeah,
pornography as well, but I don't want to talk about that. But
I don't think we need to talk about porn, but I also do think that porn has been a driver for adoption of new technologies consistently since VHS and Betamax videotapes, right? So I think that is I think just an example of where the degree to which I think creators choose to adopt new technologies and techniques or not, it varies. There's the full spectrum, and that's been true forever, right? I recently came across this anecdote of about Charlie Chaplin, who was shocked at the prospect that talkies were going to be introduced. Here's someone who is sort of protagonist and sort of defined what the silent movie genre was about, and thought that the idea of imposing on the audience, explicit dialogue and audio was absurd and was the end of movie
music and sound as well.
Right. So I think that's, to me, a classic example of where, you've got, gradations of adoption and you've got early adopters and you've got late stage adopters, right? And I think that same pattern continues to happen through today, with the most recent wave, of course, which is AI. But you mentioned kind of the combination of sound and picture. That was another key moment, right, in the evolution of technology and storytelling. The infamous, Disney sequence where, Steamboat Willie, you had synchronization between these keyframes and audio for the first time. And there was something magical when you first watched that. People didn't quite know why this was so compelling. Right. And one of the underlying reasons was this technology innovation that happened at Disney at the time.
People don't realize that in every little theater across the country, there's either an organist, a pianist, or a small band or orchestra that would play along with the silent movies that were scored, and they would play those scores. And that was how people first watched movies. And it created certainly a cottage industry for musicians across the country. That market vanished with the talkies once sound and music were incorporated into movies. And it was kind of horrific because there were a lot of suicides and, a lot of people really musicians disrupted across the country because technology changed their jobs. And people don't really know the history of film that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great example of, somehow we got through that, and embraced that new technology, and yes, jobs were lost, but then new jobs were created. And that's happened time and time again as these technology waves have advanced media, movies, and gaming.
Absolutely. Another example of that was at Digital Domain when, I was there in the early 90s and we had film scanners still, right? And we were scanning celluloid film, digital. And there was a lot of discussion at the time around the skill of, cell animation, cell keyframe animation being disrupted. And traditional animators, some of which sort of bridged the gap and moved over and started adopting digital keyframing tools, whereas other artists were disrupted. And I think, again, that pattern and the rate of adoption of new technologies is something which does continue to happen to today. It's a real topic. I mean, as a even though as a co-founder and CEO at WEVR, which is a digital studio, a new kind of digital studio, but that is what we do. And a lot of my time is obviously involved in the business aspects of collaborating with artists and creators, and understanding the technology and understanding how to bring experiences to audiences and products to audiences. The through line there is always the role of the creator and the role of the artist, and we're very, and have been very sensitive to that real challenge that new technologies and disruption brings into play. And we always try to take the position of, especially when the cat's out of the bag already, right? And it's always better to sort of try to lean in and learn and be flexible. And some unfortunately end up with, sort of more unfortunate or less fortunate circumstances than others. But as a rule, we've always been like curious, right? We're curious to figure out what's new, what's different, what the opportunities are, and how we can kind of bridge the gap and transition methodologies and tools and techniques and skill sets, and to keep evolving as things roll forward. And that, I think a pattern which I'm sure you'll appreciate is that the new doesn't completely immediately replace the old. There's a sort of a readoption or an evolution that happens.
Nuance and workflow.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Speaking of that example, cell animation to 3D animation, the classic scene is Beauty and the Beast, the chandelier scene.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. It was like mind blowing. And, it was kind of this weird mixture of the 3D chandelier with the dancing couple. And it was like, okay, yeah, this is the start of something here. And that was way back when. But if you speak about late adopters, I believe that Hollywood has been a late adopter. From either a studio or production or director perspective, because of all these issues that were raised through the strikes, right? Through the unions, deep fake technology, copyright infringement as it relates to screenplays, which I believe all those things could be worked out legally if they aren't already. But in the meantime, the world has accepted, hey, these are cool tools. I'm using them, and hey, I'm making AI films, and they may be shitty with no real actors, but they're playing with it. So I was encouraged by, yes, the co-founder of Digital Domain, James Cameron, embracing AI with his recent news around Anthropic. And I just found it also ironic. Here's the man who created the dystopian T2 doomsday scenario, and he's embracing AI, but he's always been a visionary and really eloquent in how he breaks down scenes and imagines things. So I think it's a natural evolution. And I had this approach or a phrase and point called creative-centered AI. We talk about a human-centered design, like for many years, but I think and then human-centered AI. But I think creative-centered AI puts creatives like you and your company in the driver's seat of where this technology is going to go, where they are in control. They're the creators, and they harness all these tools and develop their workflows so that we take AI in filmmaking or image making to the next level. And I think creatives need to do that. I don't think all the hacks on LinkedIn should be doing it. I think it needs to be creatives, exactly like your company. So I'm very excited that your company has embraced it. And I'd love to dig into that a little in terms of what that was like, what those early discussions were, even starting 2 years ago or even before, about what do you do with this new technology and the idea of curiosity, like you said? I think that is what propels artists and creators to remain relevant through all these technology changes, is that curiosity. So what was that like at your company?
Yeah, happy to get into that. You mentioned a couple of things which I want to highlight, which are super interesting. I very much resonate with the concept of the creator centric or creator led approach. That makes a lot of sense. I think that's really right. That's really spot on. And you also referenced Jim Cameron there for a second, which I don't know if you got a chance to watch, but he recently gave a brief talk at the AI robotics conference where he articulated, I think, in a really amazing way, probably one of the best articulations of the potential and the threats of the technology, broadly speaking, extending beyond using AI for filmmaking, but kind of really looking at the topic more broadly, and the whole concept of artificial general intelligence. And I think it's really, really terrific. As the Skynet guy, he's very forthcoming about what he sees in his perspective. And I think it's an example of, a kind of a well-balanced, yes, I'm adopting, yes, I'm taking a board seat with a premier leading generative AI company. I want to be, this is the creator-centric approach, part of the conversation, leading the path forward, and being very vocal about what the concerns and the real threats are. So I found that super, super compelling, and it continues to be an inspiration for sure. And it's kind of sort of influential in terms of how WEVR approached it. So I'll give you a bit of a historical perspective for how kind of curiosity sort of helped us kind of evolve over time. But the idea of, or the concept of using software to create goes back a while, right? And it's a degree to which you are now employing machinery and software algorithms to further automate and enhance whatever it is that you're doing. So for a classic example was, the beginning of sort of procedural animation, where in addition to keyframing, you could simulate, you could write software that could now simulate very complex particle systems or wave motions or physics of objects colliding and things getting destroyed and built up. These are all sort of techniques, right, and tools which are based on the use of an algorithm that executes on a computer, and the which is an art form in and of itself. I mean, the software engineering that's involved in designing those systems and creating those systems is really an art form. So there's been a very long sort of continuous precedent for how WEVR, with all along, when we use, I mean, I was part of the team that before we started at WEVR, even that was part of the Maya 1.0, the precursor to Maya 1.0, which is a 2D animation software system. But we still use Maya at WEVR today, right? 30 plus years later. But when Blender started to come onto the scene, we started using Blender as well. We use the Unity game engine and we use the Unreal game engine, right? And have been for several years. Started using Unreal at Electronic Arts. And so inherent in our business as the studio is and our clients demand this of ourselves, right? So we are fired in a sense in order to really bring to bear the cutting edge, what is now possible that wasn't possible 2 years ago or even 6 months ago, right? And so it's kind of our business to know and understand and learn, but that doesn't mean, like I said, we're still using Maya, right? So that's an example of how some tools continue to be used and evolved over a long period of time. I think where we started early on, and my co-founder, Anthony Batts, has been kind of looking at, and has been an early fan of generative AI tools right from the very beginning of when there was sort of more general discourse about it online in the last couple of years. But I studied AI and when I was in college 30 years ago. So I've been on this track also personally for some time, and never actively got involved with doing much with it until became really fascinated with artificial life, and kind of early neural net research, but again, didn't really apply it. But as these tools started to kind of roll out and are publicly available, which is the other remarkable thing, right? Like it used to be that you had to go to ILM to figure out some new cool movie making technique because it's the only place in the world where you could access that.
ILM, all those places, right?
Precisely. Now it's like, OpenAI rolls out beta for Sora, and
fun.
and everyone in the world has access to it. Not everyone in the world, but a point being, it's much more broadly distributed and accessible, which is a key difference, right? I think this comes back to both WEVR and our approach, right? Realizing that other people are going to figure this out if we don't. Right. So I mean, the level field, the playing field is leveled, right? In and of itself, especially with the introduction of open source, which is a very interesting sort of subtopic in and of itself, right? Proprietary generative AI tools versus open source tools, which are both, pretty much equally capable. But the real point that is for us, we're so early on, it's like, this is happening. Let's start to actually use the craft. Let's be creators ourselves. Let's experiment and learn. And more concretely, we're currently in the middle of production on an immersive show, which will be announced shortly before the end of the year. A show which will be an exhibit, which will be released publicly next year. And at the core of it is a 10-minute experience, which will be the real-time experience, which will be projected on a large sort of 180-degree screen. And it involves historical elements where we're bringing moments of history to life. And that's a fascinating topic because we're having to realize that historic documentation isn't perfectly accurate. We don't know always exactly what happened. So
there may or may not be a picture of what you're talking about.
There may or may not be a picture. There's a drawing.
They're doing to like manifest it, right? And that's where creatives need to come in. Is like, we could do this and this and this, or have an avatar or whatever.
Absolutely.
That's the creative opportunity, right?
That's exactly it. And it is a creator's interpretation. Even you see some of these statues that were created by artists that maybe were past the point of time.
Well, yeah, I mean,
so that artistic
Michelangelo wasn't using photographs to like make his use, right? It's like he's observing and interpreting. That's all part of it.
Observing and
interpreting. Part of the artistic process. And I'm a classically trained artist, illustrator. That's how I started. So I appreciate the fact, certainly, of that skill of observation and rendering something or interpreting it into some type of creative manifestation. But that's done on the shoulders of all the heroes of art through the centuries, right? And this brings up another controversy around AI's the scraping of the internet, which I call the original sin, right? It's like, we did it, it's done, the genie's out of the bottle, we can't put it back, but it happened. Moving forward, can there be more ethical sourced platforms that license licenses and authors to make it more ethical to use? Sure, I hope so, and I think that will work itself out in time. But this idea that an artist whose work is affected because somehow a guy sitting in his basement in Pacoima somehow conjured up this image through Mid-Journey that kind of looks like this guy's art in France. But the whole idea of this diffusion technology, it ingests everything from the internet and then blows it into 1 million pixels. And then through the algorithm and predictive analytics, the guy at Kokoima kind of reassembles it in a way based on a prompt, but it doesn't really exactly replicate this painting that was scraped in France, right? So, but then as artists, I've always been influenced by artists and through the ages, classical and modern, and say, yeah, and I pay homage to Andy Warhol, I pay homage to Michelangelo, whatever, because we're all learning from these greats and reinterpreting a new subject matter in a way that references certainly our heroes of the past. So what do you think about all the ethics around all of that?
Fascinating topic. And I like your referring to the original sin, where there was, you could argue a blatant disrespect for a core concept in art and creativity, which is attribution. You attribute your derivative work to the creator that came before. And there is an established, understood ethical process, even in the Creative Commons, which is an open source, sort of format for sharing works of art, right? You attribute, and there's a chain of attribution, and I think there is no reason why, and I certainly hope and I believe will be the case, that there, as legislation and regulation sort of layers come into place, there will emerge a new, more ethical model where there's much more clear attribution and use of data that is done, sort of responsibly and adheres to certain guidelines. So my personal view, which I think is also the position that our company takes as a whole, is that that needs to be worked out. And as much as we can help contributing towards working that out, that is really important. I think we will move to a world where, there will be a choice that people have whether to use a certain model or another based on the standards that are upheld by the training systems behind that model. And so, in a sense, it was kind of like, this is a terrible analogy, but I'm going to mention it anyway because it came to mind. But like, when MP3s exploded everywhere and everyone was like, this crazy, there's blatant piracy, like shut it down. And eventually it got shut down because it was piracy. But the technology of encoding, audio in a new way that was easier to distribute, blah, 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 all of that was, really good. And ultimately, I think it helped distribution. So
Apple came in and saved the day there.
In that case,
Created a whole new industry. Because they monetized it. They made a deal that monetized it.
Yeah, and make it somewhat legitimate. So anyway, that's probably not a good analogy, but I think the point being the similarity there being here that yes, we very much think about that constantly, and even in the choices we're making in the productions that we're doing, we're very careful about ensuring that we understand the sources, and it gets tricky. It's a blurry line, like you said. Like, at what point is this? It is derivative. I'm using a tool. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's clearly probably influenced by this data that was in there. So how do we appropriately, attribute the data sources that were?
Well, what's interesting, I think we should be using AI to combat the negative uses of AI. And I also think it's an opportunity to use blockchain to actually work through those attributes and contracts and monetize that whole deal flow I believe someone's working on that because that's an opportunity in a new economy. But you're right about choices. And I'm interested to know if you have an official AI policy that your company has agreed upon, and your employees are free to work on certain approved platforms, or is it an organic discussion every time with every project that you don't have an AI policy yet, but you're conscious of these things and move forward in a careful way through choices. So how is it? What's your policy? Do you have one?
Right. So our policy is to be explicit, to discuss every move we make. So we have a policy that is not written up somewhere and it's in a filing cabinet, right? Like that there is no such thing. But we do have a policy that certainly we encourage everyone to learn and understand on their own time, and as part of company time, the techniques that are becoming available. We have a very clear, open policy about that. But the minute we're actually using any of the work or any of the tools or services for an actual production, for something that is going to be remotely in any way distributed publicly or used for commercial purposes, then we have to have a very clear, organic conversation about what is being used, how is it being used. Let's make sure the client is completely aware, or do we have full acknowledgement? So that's our policy. Our policy is to make sure we're explicitly having a conversation about it. And we're a relatively small company, right? It's not like we have to implement a system to transmit it to thousands of worlds.
Those big things. You're a small company, but you are doing big things.
Thank you. Yes, we're doing some cool stuff, and we've been fortunate to have worked on some really cool projects over the years, and are continue to do so.
So there's this recent announcement that the latest kind of horror movie with Hugh Grant, they had in the credits that AI was not used to make this film as a statement. Now, attributions are credits. Do you think that as film credits roll, think about before there was CGI, that the credits were, above the line, below the line. It wasn't like voluminous. And then CGI companies came in, and then all the subcontractors, and you have literally thousands listed in the credits of a film, and the technologies used, right? So is there a future where in the credits that it'll say these AI platforms were used? These are the credited inspiration for some of these scenes. Again, standing on the shoulders of giants, and maybe some of the sample prompts or something like that. And I'm just, I just had an epiphany when you were talking. It's like, wouldn't that be a cool way to maybe start at least acknowledging it? I don't know how you monetize it except through blockchain. But that is a beginning, because they're already playing with the credits by saying no AI was used. But what about the opposite? No, AI was used, and it was used ethically with these platforms. And here's the credits, and here's the companies, here's the props. Do you see that in the future?
So I do. Well, I do. I hope, in a sense, I wish, and I want to push for a future like that along those lines. And I think there's a precedent for it. So it's difficult to imagine how at the end of a TV series you're watching on a streaming network or on a film, you're going to actually comprehensively list out all of the contributors, because it's going to be a really, really long list, right? If we use kind of to follow your train of thought. But with some of these, distributed systems like the open source projects, I like the open source analogy very, very much, because first of all, the work is the work. It's the code. It's open for everyone, for viewers to look at the code, even if you're not a contributor and the creator of the code.
Mm-hmm.
And every creator, every single person who committed a line of code to the project, they're there. Their username is there, available for anybody to see. And there's something I find really liberating and empowering about that kind of fully transparent, open model. So it would seem like we could encourage that even for a film that is, distributed through the box office, or a TV show, or any video for that matter, that there is a place online where you can, if you wanted to, transparently see down to the very lowest level of detail what specific version of what tool was used and what prompts, right? And make that as transparent as possible. And I think that everybody benefits from that. So yeah,
it's not going to from an education perspective, from a moral perspective, from a legal perspective. There are ways, right? And it takes creative people to like imagine that and embrace that, and then the legal will follow. But you need someone to break the ice and just say, well, this is the way we're doing it, and we're putting it in the credits. We're listing our open source code credits, and yeah, I mean, why not? I don't know. It's got to start somewhere, and honestly, I think we're headed towards a deregulation future, not a regulated future, because this next administration is going to be very big tech friendly and not legal friendly, not monopolistic, or they'll be monopolistic friendly. And so I think it's going to put more onus on creators, the creative people, let alone big tech, to either govern themselves or the people using the technology build workarounds so that they're trying to be open and honest and put the guardrails up themselves. That's why I ask about AI policy, because I believe it does start with the companies and the users using the platforms. It needs to start there, because regulation may never come. So in that sense, what are you doing to protect the rights of others, celebrate creative through the ages, and illuminate the process, and be an example and a beacon of how to do this right and innovate for good? That's a phrase I use a lot, because it's, again, a choice. You can either say, fuck all that shit, or just making money hand over fist by doing whatever. It's like, no, we can still make money, but we can do it the right way, give proper credit, and be a leader, right? Be a leader and an advocate. And I'm hoping that, certainly with effects houses and creatives like you, again, in a creative-centered world, AI world, where's that leadership, right? How can those companies be those leaders, embrace the technology, dispel all the mystery and dystopia, and say, this is great stuff, and we're trying to do it the right way. Let's focus on the positive, not the negative.
I love that, Curt. I think that's spot on, and I resonate with that, because that is our approach. I think our idea at WEVR right now is to lead by example. We're not going to necessarily set up some foundation and try to claim that this is the AI policy that everyone should follow. We're actually sort of saying, let's get some real productions out there, which will be launching next year. And those will be real working examples. And I think I want to follow up from this conversation, because there's some very specific things we can do, I think, to then share and make public the underlying, all the attribution list that we were talking about. I think that's a very specific outcome, which we can follow up on, which I'm very excited about. But really sort of doing that by example. And I think, you touched on, government and the influence there. And it's from a geo sort of political perspective, right? You've got a whole range of levels of regulation, the EU being potentially on one end of the scale, and other countries being on the other. And within all of that, right, I 100% agree. It's sort of like, think not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, right? A little bit like just actually do a, make something, put out an example of how AI can be used in a way that is actually thoughtful and considerate and human-centric, creator-centric and human-centric. And, I am actually, to get on a bit more on the philosophical track, in general, like, I think we are heading towards a sort of a world where we have now a silicon-based intelligent entity that humans are going to have to deal with, that we are no longer at the top of the, intelligence chain. And, and we are now coexisting with a super intelligence. That is, at this point, I think, an absolute inevitability. And it's not, it's in the future. It's happening right now. It's unfolding every day. So, I think us really sort of working together as creators and establishing a healthy relationship with that super intelligence is super important.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I think the people to lead that charge need to be philosophers, need to be creatives, need to be people other than software engineers to bring that human element into what is a future that will be shared by superintelligence, and what that means to society, industry, economics, huge implications, which we don't have to get into right now. But again, who are the leaders that are going to be taking us there in the right way? And I just don't think it's Sam Altman. I don't think it's big tech. It's got to be other people that have embraced it, like yourself, and say, we're going to try to do things the right way. But we embrace all of it, but, act as a leader. I love your leadership position in terms of that your clients expect you to be the leader. And I'm saying, I expect you to be an AI leader to guide us into that future, which is, I think is bright. I think it's a new renaissance we're entering. And just go back to the analogies of expeditions going to the new world, and people invested in those expeditions and wanting to get their money back from that investment. It's the same thing here. There's a lot of unknowns. The new world, where is it? We thought we were going to India. No, we ended up, there's this whole continent in the middle. It's like, didn't even know it was there. So it's with that excitement that, led us out of the dark ages, created the Renaissance, and that kind of pioneering spirit that not only fueled the new world, but then also once, there were certain establishments in Latin America and the Eastern Seaboard, manifest destiny took us west and united the country. There were some awful things we did with the Native Americans, but all in the name of quote unquote progress. So we're in a similar kind of situation where we're standing on this abyss, to quote James Cameron again. Like, what's out there, and what are we going to do to harness it and do it in the right way?
I very much agree with that and resonate with that. And the analogy of the traveling to a new world is I think very germane, very representative of where technologically I think we're at, specifically as creators and artists, right, that are in the business of creating media and entertainment and education, and that when even before the AI wave, right, it's really sort of hit in the last few years, there was a lot of talk even a couple of years ago about the metaverse, right, and we are increasingly using 3D technology. You can sort of see a shift from 2D based websites to applications to three-dimensional interfaces. And we're sort of heading towards this three-dimensional digital world, digital twin, where the fact of the matter is we already know more and more of our time as consumers, not only creators, we spend our time interacting with digital devices and digital worlds on our phones, on TV, and so on. And that trend isn't going away. I mean, it's clearly, that's where things continue to head. And I think that's a very real thing. Like the intersection of how creators understand and leverage AI and interplay with AI, specifically with this broader thing which we're all creating, which is this metaverse thing that is in different ways, shapes, or forms, is evolving, is happening. The work that Unreal Engine and Fortnite and where that's heading, plus many other vectors, Meta and Horizons, that I think is a very close conversation to the AI conversation, at least from my perspective as being in this business. And that is really, we are journeying, we are traveling to this new world. We are going to help contribute and shape what the rules, how we behave, how we conduct. There's a lot of really interesting things happening in multiplayer video games, socially, right? Social games, multiplayer games, how humans are choosing to interact and relate, being fully embedded in digital software.
Yeah.
It's currently not mostly AI-driven software. It's all software that's based on procedural systems and game logic and all of that. But we're already spending a significant amount of our time fully engaged with these digital software systems.
Yeah, and there's a lot of disruption going on in the gaming world. I haven't immersed myself a lot in that. I'm more of a movie guy, but I know that, there's some horrible things going on. So I don't think all of it is attributed to AI, but I think it's some corporate greed, which is a problem. And then, this creative community who makes the product, they're the ones affected. All the engineers and game designers are losing jobs to be replaced by, I don't know what, but you still have to have someone driving AI to create characters and worlds. Talking about world building, that's done all the time in the gaming world. So, yeah. Well, we're getting to the end of our podcast. I just wanted people to know where to find out more about WEVR and yourself. If you want to play up your .com, this is the time to do it.
Well, thank you. Again, Curt, really appreciate the time. Yes, so we're WEVR, WEVR.com. That's probably a good place to go check us out. I'm personally Neville Spiteri. You can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Or I should say X.
Need to get off of X. Need to go to Blue Sky, by the way. But
so I'm all for that. I think the more platforms, the better. I'm a fan of Blue Sky too. Cool.
Okay. Cool. So thanks, Neville. Definitely want to have you back. Want to hear more about the launch of your new product. And really, this has been a very exciting conversation for me because of my background and our similar backgrounds. And you're kind of the first kind of special effects person that I've talked to about AI. And I think you guys and your team are the ones that are going to take AI to the next level. So everyone tuning in, thanks so much. It's more of our RealmIQ Sessions on your favorite podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and YouTube. And please follow and smash that subscribe button. And if you're on Spotify, download these episodes and keep them on your phone while you're traveling or flying. There's some fascinating conversations. So thanks again, Neville, and have a great day.
Absolutely. Thank you.
RealmIQ. Book your corporate AI workshop today.
Subscribe to our Media Slam newsletter and learn more about the intersection of design, content, and technology.
CurtDoty.co. Branding, marketing, and product development.